Right now I want to introduce Joe Miccio, who's an FDNY retired firefighter, who did the investigation and review of this current study. Joe? Thank you, Bill. I'm a retired New York City firefighter, and also for 10 years, 2002 through 2012, I was in charge of the research and was also the supervisor of the legal team representing nearly 9,000 New York City firefighters in engine staffing cases, fire engine staffing cases, and response time cases against the city of New York, the very same safety issues that I'm investigating now in the city of Long Beach. I was also the chairman of the Labor Management Committee that worked closely together and with the upper echelon of the New York City Fire Department, conducting countless meetings and negotiations with the FDNY's chief of department, deputy chiefs, deputy commissioners, and appointees on developing and changing policy matters of critical impact affecting the safety of New York City firefighters and the people they are sworn to protect. And quite often these responsibilities involve working closely with New York City councilpersons and other elected officials on matters affecting public safety in their efforts to stop or to create key FDNY safety policies that they believe were important to the families who live in the districts they represent. I have no financial relationship or business interest with any of the parties involved in this issue, nor do any members of my family. I am merely a Long Beach West End resident with professional expertise and extensive experience researching, investigating, negotiating, and litigating against, and also sometimes together with, the busiest fire department in the nation, which is managed by one of the largest cities in the world. When I saw the broad, sweeping fire and EMS response policy changes that were announced this winter, and the underlying data and conclusions promulgated in the ICMA study by the City Council that these changes were being based upon, I did the responsible thing and offered my assistance. In this professional capacity, I have identified inconsistencies, inaccuracies, and key omissions in the ICMA study that our City Council spent $55,000 of taxpayer money in their efforts to improve the safety of everyone who lives, works, or visits the city of Long Beach. I'll tell a teeny bit about the Long Beach demographics, which is very relevant to my investigation and study. This is important because Long Beach is different than anywhere else on Long Island. According to the U.S. Census reports, our city is more densely populated than the Rockaway Peninsula and Queens, which is protected 24/7 by the New York City Fire Department with the assistance of local volunteer fire companies. And Long Beach's population density is amplified by 50% each summer, further compounding the public safety challenges its fire department must face. Long Beach also has more tall buildings than anywhere else on Long Island. Its dense population and concentration of large multiple dwellings presents unique firefighting challenges that do not exist anywhere else on Long Island. Now I will speak about the response time data that is referred to in the handout package here, which is really key. My investigation started with fire engine response time conclusions presented in the ICMA study, which, as documented in today's handout, are severely flawed by a matter of minutes in each instance. In order to uncover these flaws, I had the data extracted for each. I had the data for each fire extracted from the Long Beach Fire Department system for each structure fire for the last 2 years. I also had extracted all 703 emergency calls for 1 year that both the paid and the volunteer engines were dispatched to. And I have the stack of underlying data that this information was drawn from, freely available here for your inspection or whatever. Call by call, line by line, arrival time, departure time, turnout time, wherever it was available, we pulled it out. It's here. This is the ICMA study. I went through it and annotated it just as if I were taking on Mayor Bloomberg again. These are the Excel spreadsheets drawn from all these, having to do all the averages, the individual runs, and so on and so forth to fires. I have them up here if anybody would like to speak or go over them. I'd be more than glad to spend the rest of my afternoon. Now, this is the interesting thing. Reconciling the actual fire data that was in here that came from the Long Beach system with the conflicting data conclusions that were in this ICMA study it was often impossible to do a reconciliation. For example, just one example. On one page, the ICMA report indicates there were 13 structure fires for the year. On other pages, it states there were 37. And yet again, in another section, it states there were approximately 8 structural fires per year. Now, for EMS, for the ER call data, ambulance time to, at, and from the off-island emergency response room, according to the ICMA report, is 40 minutes. That's the data they gave. Now, a new Long Beach ER has since been announced to open on July 1st. And according to the city's own ICMA experts, and I quote, "The driving force behind these recommendations is the impact that the closing of the local hospital, aka the ER, has had on operations. The ICMA's recommendations are based on a situation that will no longer exist and on response data that is no longer valid." Now the key omissions. Then I considered the key decision-making information that was omitted from the ICMA study, which is documented in today's handout. If you take a look in here, you can flip past the data. This is the director of the ICMA's who did our study, his blog post, which was posted less than a year before their study came out. And these are from other ICMA studies that he conducted around the country. Now I'm going to explain why you should look at that information. Thomas Wizarek, the ICMA study director, specifically addresses in his ICMA blog the rescue problems, water delays, and increased fire sizes caused by reduced fire crews fighting fires in tall buildings. And he highlights studies corroborating the same. Respectable studies from government organizations and the government uses to develop their standards. Long Beach has more tall buildings than the rest of Long Island, as I said before, and has recently approved 2 additional 15-story multiple dwellings to be built. Yet, Mr. Wizarek makes no mention of these issues or the studies in his ICMA recommendations to the City Council of Long Beach, while at the same time recommending to our City Council to reduce their fire crew sizes. ICMA Director Wizarek has included in his ICMA studies for other cities critical public safety recommendations and warnings regarding fire propagation speed in correlation with response times, tall building life danger considerations for EMS and fire tactics, key incident data collection as it pertains to fire EMS deployment planning. None of this was mentioned in his Long Beach ICMA study. And I'll just point that again. I pulled out from Palo Alto, California, several pages from their study outlining these things here, laying them out. It's mind-boggling to me as a researcher on this that would be left out from someone who was a fire chief and claims to have all sorts of background and expertise. Now, another thing he fails to mention is in the study, the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration rules that prohibit first arriving firefighters to enter your burning home under most circumstances under his ICMA plan with the reduced number of firefighters until the volunteers arrived. So he reduced the firefighter, he's recommending a reduction, and under the OSHA rules, you have to have a certain number for letting go in. And I'll spare you my monologue on that, and just let you know, the Long Island Herald, the Long Beach Herald published this in the end of last month of March, which I explain that in detail. It's attached to the study, so if this could explain that. I'd be more than glad, as well as any of the members here, can explain that to you. Economic observations in the report. I also discovered key economic components and vague terminology in the ICMA study that are of important note. On page 22, it states, the estimated fire department savings to the city would be $3,314,000 per year. But, it continues, and that was a quote, right? But it continues, in quotes, and this is the terminology, how things are buried in reports, the words that are used are very important when you handle a case. Overall savings may be less or neutral. Overall savings may be less or neutral based on any subsidy the city may be obligated to in a future private EMS private contract, which is one of the recommendations of the two that they had on the report. Now I'm going to explain to you how this is hidden and how they don't really go on to explain it, okay? When it says the fire department savings, so the fire department is my left pocket, so the fire department is going to save money because we're going to be taking people out of the fire department. And then it goes, the overall savings may be less or neutral based on any subsidy, the city, that's this pocket. Mind you, it all comes and goes from the same pot. So, and believe it or not, that's the extent that they discussed that. So that's hidden in there, so they can say we told you the truth, but nobody really recognizes the truth. You know, if you really look at it, I had to go over it a bunch of times before it hit me. Whoa. Okay, on page 27 of the ICMA study, it states, the costs associated with retirements and other benefits are lost in an aggregate cost center elsewhere in the budget. The city does not use a program budget or a performance-based budget process at this time. Now, the ICMA and the city have talked about, retirement, salary, pension benefits, and everything, and saying how much they're going to save. And yet, their study is saying that information is lost. And look, I don't know what they're trying to say here, but I know what it looks like to me. At a minimum, it would require. And then it comes to safety management. On page 7 of the ICMA study, it states, there is a void of direction, operating guidelines, and many of the managerial functions. And, I continue to quote, the instability in the organizational structure and leadership may detract from the success of the change management process. But they propose some major changes here, and they're saying here that the problems that they haven't corrected yet have not been addressed before they're about to make these changes. And then it goes on, this is the part that really raised my eyebrow. On page 25 it states, additionally, the void of direction for high-risk activities, such as fireground operations, may contribute to an increased risk of preventable injuries or line-of-duty deaths. I apologize, I'm trying to be professional and neutral here, but these considerable fire department management problems must be corrected before implementing any of the broad changes to public safety policies impacting fire and EMS response, such as the City Council is proposing. My conclusions, I've presented to you only some of the issues of concern with this ICMA study. My conclusion is that the critical response data is severely flawed or outright inaccurate. The dangerous key safety omissions are glaring, and important economic savings described in the report are often unclear and sometimes not fully addressed. I would suggest that the city seek reimbursement of the $55,000 in taxpayer funds it paid the ICMA. While it is important for the City Council to continue its efforts to find economic savings for the taxpayers, the impact of such changes to fire and EMS public safety policies must always be addressed satisfactorily first, before implementing any economic cost-saving measures. If the City of Long Beach implements its proposed sweeping changes in how its fire department addresses these critical public safety issues, this would not only be irresponsible, but it will expose the City of Long Beach and its taxpayers to potential civil liability if someone should be injured or killed under these proposed fire and EMS changes.